The conference room still smelled like stale coffee and disappointment when Andrew Morrison slid that fake smile across his face and tapped his pen on my quarterly reports. "You won't need to prep for Thursday's client review," he said, casual as ordering lunch. "Bryce will be taking point on Westbridge from here on out. Time to let the next generation show what they can do." He said it like we were passing down a family recipe, not a $250 million contract I'd been nursing for 15 years. I'm James Caldwell, 48 years old, and I've been in this business long enough to know when someone's about to hand you a knife in the back with a ribbon on it. I didn't flinch, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me sweat. Just reached into my desk drawer, pulled out the company phone loaded with 15 years of Westbridge communications, and set it down in front of his kid. "Everything you need is in there," I said. Andrew nodded, like he'd just solved world hunger. Bryce, his 26-year-old son fresh out of some Ivy League MBA program, picked up that phone like it was a new toy. The kid had been hanging around the office for 3 months now, supposedly learning the ropes, but mostly just learning how to expense lunch meetings and use corporate buzzwords in sentences that made no sense. Now, before we get to the part where everything goes sideways, let me paint you the picture of how we got here. I've been the lead on Westbridge Technologies since 2009. That's 15 years of red-eye flights to emergency meetings, answering calls at 2 a.m. when their servers went down, and holding the hand of their CEO, Richard Westfield, through everything from hostile takeover attempts to that time their head of security accidentally leaked customer data during an earnings call. Richard Westfield is what you'd call old-school military precision. Former Air Force colonel who runs Westbridge like a submarine, tight, efficient, and zero tolerance for screw-ups. He doesn't do small talk about the weather, doesn't care if you went to Harvard or community college, and if you waste his time with PowerPoint slides full of synergy and paradigm shifts, he'll hang up on you mid-sentence. But over 15 years, we'd built something you can't manufacture in a workshop or learn from a textbook: genuine professional trust. The kind where he'd call me directly when Wall Street analysts were sniffing around, or when the Pentagon wanted to discuss classified contracts. I wasn't just another vendor to Richard. I was his outside counsel, his sounding board, his early warning system when corporate storms were brewing. That relationship had made Morrison & Associates a lot of money. Not just the annual retainer, but the crisis management fees, the merger consultation work, the strategic planning sessions that could run 6 figures for a weekend. Westbridge wasn't just our biggest client, they were our most prestigious. The kind of account that opens doors to other Fortune 500 companies and makes competitors wonder what you know that they don't. Andrew Morrison, on the other hand, has different priorities these days. He's been pushing this succession planning agenda for months now, holding meetings about bringing fresh perspective to legacy relationships. Corporate speak for my son graduated business school and needs somewhere impressive to land. I started noticing the signs back in February. Little things at first. My name mysteriously left off meeting invites I'd created. Conference calls rescheduled without notification. Bryce popping into strategy sessions he had no business attending, then acting confused when I asked what he was doing there. Dad thought I should start shadowing some of our key accounts, he'd say, grinning like he'd just discovered the secret to cold fusion. Learning from the masters, you know? The kid meant well, I'll give him that. But good intentions don't qualify you to handle sensitive military contractor relationships. I watched him once try to explain market positioning to our pharmaceutical client using sports metaphors, called their new drug pipeline a slam dunk in the 4th quarter with major upside potential. The client's face went whiter than hospital sheets. Another time, Bryce suggested we create a viral marketing campaign for a defense contractor's new surveillance technology. Wanted to make TikTok videos about next-level security solutions. I had to explain why the Pentagon might not appreciate their classified projects being promoted through dance videos, but Andrew couldn't see it. Every mistake looked like youthful enthusiasm to him. Every confused client reaction was just resistance to change. To Andrew, Bryce represented the future, and I was some dinosaur who'd forgotten how to evolve with the times. "He's got fresh ideas, James," Andrew would tell me after another one of Bryce's brainstorming sessions. The clients love his energy. Maybe we've been overthinking these relationships. Sure they did. That's why 3 of our mid-tier accounts had quietly requested different representation after Bryce's energy consultations. But Andrew either didn't notice or didn't care. His son was learning the family business, and that was all that mattered. The writing was on the wall by March, but I kept thinking common sense would prevail. Richard Westfield wasn't some startup CEO you could impress with enthusiasm and buzzwords. He was a former military officer who'd built a billion-dollar company by surrounding himself with competent people and cutting loose anyone who couldn't deliver results. Surely Andrew understood that switching account managers on a relationship this delicate was like performing heart surgery with a butter knife. Surely he wouldn't risk the firm's most valuable client just to give his son some resume padding. I was wrong about that. The final straw wasn't dramatic. It was Tuesday at 6:15 p.m. when I was packing up to head home. The office was mostly empty except for the cleaning crew and a few junior associates pulling late nights to impress management. One of them, Kevin Walsh, stopped by my cubicle looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Hey, James," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Bryce was asking about the Westbridge portal access. Said he needed to update some client information." I stopped mid-pack and looked at him. I wasn't informed of any handover. Kevin shifted uncomfortably. "That's what I told him. He said you'd cleared it with Andrew already, said it was part of the transition plan." I checked my email right there in front of Kevin. Nothing. No transition memo, no formal announcement, no heads up from Andrew, just radio silence. But when I logged into our system administrator panel, there it was in black and white. Bryce Morrison had been granted full access to the Westbridge Technologies account at 4:37 p.m. that afternoon. 15 years of relationship building, hundreds of confidential documents, strategic plans worth millions of dollars, all handed over to someone who thought pivot was something you did on a basketball court. "Thanks for letting me know, Kevin," I said. The kid nodded and hurried away, probably sensing he'd just delivered news nobody wanted to hear. I didn't call Andrew that night, didn't storm into his office demanding explanations, didn't send angry emails or schedule emergency meetings. I just sat there in the empty office, watching the cleaning crew empty trash cans and listening to the HVAC system cycle through its evening routine. That's when I remembered the conversation that changed everything. Chicago, 3 years ago, October 2021. Richard Westfield and I had been working until nearly midnight on merger documentation that could make or break Westbridge's expansion into the medical device sector. Sensitive information, the kind that could move stock prices if it leaked to the wrong people. We were in the hotel bar afterward, both of us too wired from caffeine and deadline pressure to sleep. Richard nursed a whiskey and looked at me with those sharp gray eyes that had intimidated Pentagon generals and Fortune 500 CEOs. "James, I've worked with a lot of consultants over the years," he said. "Most of them talk a good game during the pitch meeting, then fold like lawn chairs when the real pressure starts. You're different. When you give me your word, I know it's solid as concrete." That's when he pulled out a separate contract from his briefcase. A personal non-disclosure agreement between Richard Westfield and James Caldwell. Not Morrison and Associates, not Andrew's firm, me, personally. "This merger information doesn't leave our circle," he said, sliding the document across the table. "I'm trusting you with details that could destroy my company if they get into the wrong hands. That trust is personal, not corporate. If something happens to you, if you leave the firm, if your company gets bought or sold, this agreement stays with you." I read through it carefully. The language was crystal clear. Any communication about the protected information had to stay between the two named signatories. No exceptions, no corporate overrides, no passing it down the chain of command. Section 3A was particularly explicit. Contact by unauthorized third parties constitutes immediate breach and nullifies all related agreements. I signed it without hesitation. So did he. We shook hands, finished our drinks, and never talked about it again. But that piece of paper had been sitting in my personal files for 3 years, waiting for exactly this moment. Now, sitting in my darkened office on a Tuesday evening, I realized Andrew had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He'd handed Westbridge access to his son without checking what legal landmines might be buried in the relationship. Wednesday morning came with its usual routine of coffee, traffic, and fluorescent office lighting. But something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is hot and impulsive and makes you do stupid things. What I felt was something colder and more calculating. Curiosity, maybe. Professional interest in watching inexperience collide with consequence. I didn't log into the Westbridge portal that morning, didn't check their communications or review pending deliverables. Bryce was the lead now, which meant everything that happened next was his responsibility. I just caught up on other accounts, returned calls from smaller clients, and waited. At 10:23 a.m., my email pinged with a new message in the shared client folder. Subject line, "Hey Richard, exciting partnership ahead." I read it once, blinked, then read it again to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. "Hey Richard, hope you're having an amazing week. I'm Bryce Morrison, your new point of contact here at Morrison & Associates. Super excited to be working with such an innovative leader. I've been following Westbridge's journey and I'm totally inspired by your vision. Can we grab a virtual coffee next week to sync up on some fresh ideas? Maybe we can explore some next-level synergies. Looking forward to taking our partnership to new heights. Can't wait to collaborate." The email was signed with 3 exclamation points, a smiley face emoji, and Bryce's new title, Senior Partnership Development Specialist. I had to read that title twice. Senior Partnership Development Specialist. The kid had been at the company for 3 months and somehow convinced his father to give him a senior title. Meanwhile, I'd been account director for 15 years. A smiley face emoji. To Richard Westfield, CEO of a publicly traded defense contractor who once fired his entire communications team for using Comic Sans font in a press release. The same Richard Westfield who'd had Pentagon colonels court-martialed for security breaches. The man who considered excessive punctuation a sign of mental weakness. I closed my laptop and went to get coffee. Real coffee, from the expensive machine in the executive break room, not the burnt sludge from our department's Mr. Coffee. I needed a moment to process what I'd just witnessed. Bryce Morrison had just stepped on a landmine, and he didn't even know it yet. By lunchtime, word had spread through the office grapevine that Andrew's succession plan was moving forward faster than expected. The man himself was holding court in the executive dining area, talking to anyone who'd listen about how smoothly the transition was progressing. "Bryce is already connecting with our key stakeholders," Andrew announced to a table full of junior partners and department heads. "Natural relationship builder, just like his old man. He's got that fresh perspective our clients have been asking for." I almost choked on my sandwich. Fresh perspective. Right. "The kid's got vision," Andrew continued, warming to his theme. "He's not stuck in old patterns like some people. He sees opportunities where others see obstacles." I caught the sideways glance he threw in my direction. Message received, loud and clear. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I pulled up the Chicago NDA and read through it again. Not because I needed to review the terms, but because sometimes you need to see the words on paper to believe they're real. Section 3A was right there in black and white, as clear as a court order. All communications regarding protected information shall remain exclusively between the named signatories. Contact by unauthorized parties constitutes immediate breach and nullifies all related agreements. No wiggle room, no corporate override clause. No, unless your boss's son really wants to make a good impression on the CEO. I closed the file and went back to my other work. The dominoes were already falling. All I had to do was wait for them to finish hitting the ground. Thursday morning rolled around like any other day in the office. Coffee brewing in the break room, junior associates scrambling to look busy, the usual hum of keyboards and conference calls echoing through the halls. But underneath all that normalcy, something had shifted. Not in the building, in me. I wasn't checking Westbridge communications anymore. That was Bryce's job now. I wasn't monitoring their project timelines or reviewing their quarterly reports. I wasn't even thinking about the pending contract renewals that usually kept me up at night. For the first time in 15 years, Westbridge Technologies wasn't my problem. It was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. I spent Thursday morning catching up on accounts I'd been neglecting. Returned calls to 3 pharmaceutical companies who'd been trying to schedule strategy sessions for weeks. Reviewed proposals for an aerospace contractor in Denver who wanted help with their Pentagon relationships. Good, solid work that reminded me why I'd gotten into this business in the first place. At 11:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, but the message was short and unmistakable. "James, call me immediately. R. Westfield." I didn't call immediately. I finished reviewing the Denver proposal, made notes for my follow-up call, then walked down the hall to grab coffee from the good machine. Sometimes, the most important conversations require proper preparation. When I finally dialed Richard's number, he picked up before the first ring finished. "James, His voice was flat, controlled, but I'd known him long enough to hear the steel underneath. I received an interesting email yesterday from someone claiming to be my new point of contact. Want to explain what that's about? I could have played dumb, could have acted surprised or claimed I didn't know what he was talking about. But Richard Westfield didn't waste time on games, and neither did I. That would be Andrew Morrison's son, I said. I was removed from your account Tuesday without prior notice. Were you consulted about our personal agreement? No, sir. The NDA transfer was never discussed. The pause that followed lasted long enough for me to hear traffic in the background on his end. When Richard spoke again, his voice had dropped to the tone he usually reserved for firing executives. James, you know what this means. Yes, sir, I do. Good. There's going to be a conference call Monday at 9 a.m. You'll want to be there. The line went dead. No goodbye, no small talk, no explanation of what was coming. Richard Westfield had said everything he needed to say in 30 seconds. Friday passed in a strange kind of suspended animation. Andrew spent most of the day in back-to-back meetings with the finance team, probably planning how to spend the Westbridge Renewal Commission. Bryce bounced around the office like a golden retriever who'd just learned his name, telling anyone who'd listen about his vision for modernizing client relationships. The key is authentic engagement, I heard him explaining to one of our junior associates. You have to meet clients where they are, not where you think they should be. Richard Westfield seems like a really genuine guy. I think we're going to build something special together. I didn't warn him, didn't suggest he might want to research Richard's background before their next communication. Didn't mention that the last person who called Richard Westfield genuine in a business context got blacklisted from every defense contractor in the DC area. Some lessons you can't teach. Some mistakes people have to make for themselves. Over the weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I completely disconnected from work, didn't check emails, didn't review client files, didn't think about Monday morning meetings. Instead, I went fishing at a lake about an hour outside the city, sat in a boat for 6 hours, and caught exactly nothing. It was perfect. Monday morning came with the kind of calendar invite that makes corporate executives break out in cold sweats. Subject: Westbridge Contract Review. Urgent compliance matter. Attendees included Andrew Morrison, Bryce Morrison, our head of legal Patricia Wells, myself, and a conference line for Richard Westfield. The conference room felt smaller than usual when I walked in at 8:55 a.m. Andrew was already there, pacing behind his chair like a caged animal. Bryce sat at the far end of the table, scrolling through his phone with the casual confidence of someone who still didn't understand what was happening. Patricia had 3 thick legal binders spread in front of her and was wearing the expression lawyers get when they're about to deliver very expensive bad news. Nobody was making eye contact. Nobody was making small talk. The silence felt like the moment before a demolition when everyone's waiting for the dynamite to go off. At exactly 9 o'clock a.m., the conference phone crackled to life. Richard's voice filled the room, crisp and professional and absolutely terrifying in its calm precision. Andrew, we need to discuss your recent unauthorized contact regarding protected information. Andrew's face went 3 shades paler. He cleared his throat and tried to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. Richard, if this is about the transition, I can explain the reasoning behind. The transition violated a standing NDA between Westbridge Technologies and James Caldwell. Specifically, a personal agreement signed in October 2021 regarding confidential merger documentation. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia's pen stopped moving across her legal pad. Bryce looked up from his phone for the first time all morning, confusion spreading across his face like spilled coffee. I don't understand, Bryce said, his voice cracking slightly. Dad said this was just a normal account handover. I was just trying to introduce myself and build rapport. Your father was incorrect, Richard replied. The agreement explicitly states that communications about protected merger information must remain between the original signatories. Your contact yesterday constituted a direct breach of contract. Andrew found his voice, though it sounded like he was speaking through gravel. Richard, surely we can work something out. Bryce didn't know about any special arrangements. This is just a misunderstanding between professionals. Ignorance of contract terms isn't a defense in business law, Andrew. The breach has occurred. The damage is done. Patricia was frantically flipping through her legal files, looking for something that might salvage the situation. She found nothing useful. because there was nothing to find. Per Section 7 of our agreement, Richard continued, his voice as final as a judge's gavel, Westbridge Technologies is terminating our engagement with Morrison & Associates effective immediately. All work product, strategic documents, and ongoing projects are to cease as of this conversation. The words hit the conference room like a wrecking ball through plate glass. $250 million. Gone. 15 years of relationship building finished. The biggest client in the firm's history, walking away because someone's son wanted to send a friendly email with emoji. Bryce looked like someone had just explained calculus to him in ancient Greek. His mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. Andrew slumped forward in his chair like all the air had been let out of him. Richard, Andrew tried one last time, his voice barely above a whisper. This seems like a disproportionate response to a simple communication error. We've had a business relationship for 15 years. Surely that counts for something. We had a relationship with James Caldwell for 15 years, Richard corrected. Your firm was just the billing address, and that relationship was protected by a legally binding agreement that you chose to ignore. Patricia finally spoke up, her lawyer instincts kicking in despite the hopelessness of the situation. Mr. Westfield, perhaps we could discuss alternative arrangements, some form of remediation that would allow us to continue working together. Ms. Wells, Richard's voice carried the patience of someone explaining basic math to a slow student. The merger documentation your firm had access to is now in SEC filing. Any premature disclosure could constitute securities fraud. The safest course for everyone involved is immediate cessation of all contact. Securities fraud. The words hung in the air like toxic gas. This wasn't just about losing a client anymore. This was about potential federal investigation, regulatory scrutiny, and the kind of legal problems that destroy careers and companies. Bryce finally found his voice, though it cracked like a teenager asking someone to prom. I didn't know about any merger stuff. I was just trying to be friendly. Can't we just explain that it was a mistake? The law doesn't recognize trying to be friendly as a defense against contract violations, Richard replied. Your email referenced taking our partnership to new heights and exploring next-level synergies. That language suggests knowledge of confidential strategic planning. I watched the blood drain from Bryce's face as he realized his own words were being used as evidence against him. Marketing buzzwords that sounded impressive in business school were now potential proof of insider trading. James, Richard's voice cut through the mounting panic. I want to thank you for maintaining your end of our agreement. My legal team will contact you directly about transition procedures and final documentation. Then the line went dead. Just like that. No dramatic speeches, no lengthy explanations, no opportunity for Andrew to negotiate or plead. Richard Westfield had said what he needed to say and hung up, leaving the rest of us to deal with the wreckage. The silence that followed was the most complete thing I'd ever experienced. You could hear the HVAC system cycling, the distant hum of traffic outside, the soft tick of the wall clock marking seconds that felt like hours. Andrew stared at the conference phone like it might ring again with better news. Patricia was scribbling notes furiously, probably calculating billable hours for the damage control that was coming. Bryce looked like he was about to throw up. Finally, Andrew spoke. His voice sounded like he'd been gargling gravel. This can't be legal. There has to be something we can challenge. Some way to get them back to the table. Patricia closed her legal pad with a soft snap. The NDA is ironclad, Andrew. Personal agreements supersede corporate arrangements. There's nothing to challenge here. But $250 million, Andrew said, the number seeming to stick in his throat. 15 years of relationship building. Our biggest client. There has to be something. There was something, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me like they'd forgotten I was in the room. It was called reading the contract before you made decisions about it. Andrew's face flushed red. James, this doesn't have to end your career here. We can work through this, find a way to rebuild. I stood up, straightened my tie, and picked up the folder I'd brought to the meeting. Andrew, some lessons are expensive. This one cost you $250 million and probably your son's career in client relations. Bryce looked up at me with something between panic and desperation. James, I'm sorry, I didn't know. If I'd known about the NDA, I never would have sent that email. Can't you call Richard back? Explain that it was just a misunderstanding? I looked at the kid for a long moment. 26 years old, Ivy League education, natural confidence that comes from never facing real consequences for anything. Part of me felt sorry for him. Most of me didn't. "Bryce," I said, "Richard Westfield doesn't do takebacks. When he makes a decision, it's final. You burned a bridge in one email that took me 15 years to build. And with that, I walked out. Not out of the building, but out of their story. I had one more stop to make." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Andrew's corner office, placing my resignation letter on his desk. He read it twice, then looked up at me with eyes that suddenly looked much older than they had that morning. "James, don't do this. We can fix this somehow. Bring in new clients, rebuild the portfolio. I need experienced people like you now more than ever." I sat down across from his desk, the same desk where he delivered his succession planning speech just a week ago. "Andrew, you made it clear that experience wasn't what you valued. You wanted fresh perspective, remember? Energy. New ideas." "I was wrong," he said simply. "I made a mistake." "Yes, you did. You made the mistake of thinking family loyalty was more important than professional competence. You made the mistake of assuming 15 years of relationship building was something you could hand off like a set of car keys." Andrew rubbed his temples like he was fighting off a migraine. "What about Bryce? This is going to destroy him." "No," I said, "it's going to teach him. The question is whether he learns from it or spends the rest of his career blaming other people for his mistakes." I stood to leave, then paused at his office door. For what it's worth, Andrew, I didn't plan this. I didn't set a trap or orchestrate Richard's reaction. I just knew what would happen if someone violated that NDA, and I let it happen. Sometimes the best strategy is doing nothing and letting incompetence reveal itself. By 2 p.m., word had spread through the office like wildfire. Hushed conversations in break rooms, worried glances from junior associates, partners quietly updating their resumes. Losing a $250 million client doesn't happen quietly in a firm our size. By 4 p.m., my phone was ringing. Richard Westfield's assistant calling to discuss consulting opportunities. It seemed Richard still valued 15 years of relationship building, even if Morrison and Associates didn't. By 5 p.m., I was cleaning out my desk, packing 15 years of client files and industry contacts into cardboard boxes. Junior associates stopped by to shake my hand and wish me luck. Most of them had figured out what really happened, even if they couldn't say it out loud. Andrew Morrison had chosen family over competence, nepotism over professionalism, short-term comfort over long-term success, and the market had delivered its verdict with mathematical precision. Some lessons are expensive. This one cost him everything that mattered. As I carried my last box out to the elevator, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Genuine optimism about the future. Richard Westfield was right about one thing. When you build relationships the right way, based on trust and competence instead of politics and favoritism, those relationships survive any corporate upheaval. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see.